The next task that needs to be done on the administration side is enabling the logging. SharePoint can log events that occur among its services to help you monitor the health of the system and to diagnose problems before they occur and if they occur. It also gathers information on who visited pages, which can be quite useful. Diagnostic Logging tracks events and services and is on by default. Web Analytics and Health Data Collection collects page view information and reports out on that accordingly. So let's go take a peek at that in Central Administration. Once you're in Central Administration, go ahead and click on Monitoring on the Quick Launch left panel. You have some different options here: Health Analyzer, Timer Jobs, Reporting. What we're going to be looking at is Configure Diagnostic Logging to start with. These are all the different categories that can be logged. There's quite a few. It'll tell you the event level and the trace level. If I click on Access Services, for instance, and I highlight those, it's going to give me the event level and trace level for that. These control the severity of events that are going to appear in the event log and in the trace logs. The trace logs are the ULS logs that SharePoint provides, and we'll talk a little bit more towards the bottom. As the severity decreases, the number of events logged will increase. For instance, I'm having problems with search. Someone's saying that they're not getting search results, or we're getting errors within the search environment. If I click on here and expand it, click the plus sign to the left of SharePoint Server, it's going to give me what it's currently set for the search. And you can see there are multiple options to choose from. If I want to validate the Prepare to Move or the Service Timer Job Handler, I would select those and come down to the bottom of that category, that section, and choose the least critical event to report in the event log. Always be very careful when choosing verbose, because those event logs will fill up very quickly and max out your drive. I'm going to change these settings to error, and the least critical event to report in the trace log, which is the ULS logs, is going to be high. I'm going to click OK. When we come back into Configure Diagnostic Logging, one of the new things with SharePoint 2010 is it tells you what's been modified from the default. No longer having to go in and try to determine what the default was and setting things back after you've made those changes. You can see the ones highlighted in bold or the ones that are no longer at the default. And if I'm going to revert it back to its previous settings so that I've gathered the information that I need, we've resolved the problem, we want to set it back so our log files are reduced in size, I would then come back and choose Reset to Default for both of the options that I've changed. And then tell it OK. So let's go back in there now, and you'll see none of the categories are bolded. This is key. It's not something you want to keep at a high level to where you're accruing a lot of data and it's filling up your log files, but you do want to make sure that it's set at the default so that it does capture the critical events that you need that might identify potential problems in the future. Event log flood protection. If you have repeating events that are filling up the event log and the trace logs, you can choose to use event log flood protection. It detects repeating events, and when it's being logged repeatedly, they're detected and suppressed until things return to normal. And the trace log. These are the ULS logs that SharePoint gathers regarding everything that has to do with SharePoint, from what the users do to deleting sites or changing user permissions, things like that. All of this goes into the trace log. By default, it puts it in the log files within the root folder of SharePoint. This is not where you want this. I highly recommend one of the first things you do is you change this to a separate drive that your operating system and that SharePoint is not installed on. because these will grow rather large. And if you have to do any monitoring because of problems that have arisen and up the logging, then it could cause problems. So you want to make sure that you have it set to a separate drive. If you have a multi-server farm, this path must exist on every server within the farm. If a user reports that they're getting an error, accessing a page or uploading a document, anything along those lines, it's going to be logged in the ULS logs. And you'll have to go to each individual server because you won't know which WFE they hit. So you'll need access to each one of those logs, and it does need to exist on all servers within the farm. You can choose the number of days to store the logs, and you can restrict the trace log disk space usage, which is highly recommended. You certainly don't want it to be more than what you have allocated for that drive. Now, the other portion that we're going to talk about is configuring usage and health data. If I click on this link, this is not on by default. I'm going to turn this on. This is key for being able to determine what pages are being utilized, what features are being used, and so on. And this is used to gauge how SharePoint is being used by the business. Do be careful, though, because this can use up a lot of system resources and impact performance and disk usage. What events do you want to log? Content that's being imported, what's being exported, the timer jobs, the rating usage, inventory, and so on. This also goes to the SharePoint server root. These logs are also, by default, set to go to the SharePoint server root. Again, I would recommend putting these on another server. A lot of times it'll be the same as you would for the trace logs and so on. How large do you want that file to get? 5 gig, 10 gig? If you have a 20 gig drive, you certainly don't want it to be more than that. And enable health data collection. Health reports are built by taking snapshots of various resources at different points in time. You can enable this here and also choose what schedule you would like that to run on. And these are the different timer jobs associated with that item. There's also log collection schedule. A timer job collects the log files from each server and copies all that information, that data, into a database. And later it'll be analyzed and used for reporting purposes. Logging database server. This is the database that's going to be used for this information that's been collected. And you want it to be descriptive as to what it's for. If you have a multi-server environment, you may have 2 or 3 different SQL servers or SQL instances. One is used for central admin. One could be used for service application search. You can have another SQL server that's specific to content databases. So if you have a different one than the default that's specified here, you would enter that underneath the database server area and the database name. Always use Windows authentication and then tell it OK. And it'll process the changes that have just been made. One of the things to keep in mind when it comes to usage analysis is that you have quotas applied. A lot of the data that is collected and analyzed requires that to be in place. Let's go ahead and just take a quick peek at some of the reports that are available. If I click here on View Administrative Reports, you'll see that it comes up with Search Administration Reports. We're not getting a lot of information right now, but let's just take a peek and see what we've got. Crawl rate. These are some of the items that you can report on. We haven't enabled the search yet, so we shouldn't have any content in there, but it'll tell you crawl rate per content source, per type, latency trend, back-end query latency. So you can get some additional information and reports on items that you have enabled within the farm. And this one's here by default because it just is search and it's such a pivotal part.